In today's session, we're going to take a look at the available auto-scale algorithms that determine the size of a host pool at any given time in terms of the number of hosts that are going to be either on or off or exist inside of the host pool to begin with. Now, there are a couple of special cases that I want to mention. First, in a previous video, we talked about single user desktops. We go to manage autoscale, which is where we can change our autoscaling algorithm and trigger. You'll notice that there is a special kind of autoscale trigger logic for single user desktops called spare available desktops. And you just specify how many available desktops the system should keep. So this is a special use case for this type of a host pool. However, for every other type of dynamic host pool, whether it's a session desktop that's pooled, or if it's a remote app type host pool, in those scenarios, there are 3 available load balancing algorithms that we're going to look at. So let's go ahead and click on Manage Autoscale again, go down into the scaling section, and here we can see 3 scaling logics and autoscale algorithms. So the first one is called CPU usage, and as the name implies, it looks at the CPU usage across all of the hosts inside of the host pool and looks at the average CPU utilization and uses a high CPU threshold and a low CPU threshold to determine whether it needs to scale out. If the CPU usage exceeds this high threshold for a pre-configured duration, it's going to trigger a scale out event. You can specify how many machines, how many VMs will be actually affected by the scale out event. And a scale out event can be one of 2 things. It could either start any currently powered off VMs that are ready to go, or if all the base capacity VMs are turned on already and are running, then it's going to tap into the burst capacity VMs and start building them on demand. So if the utilization exceeds 65%, in this case for 5 minutes or longer, scaling out will kick in. It's going to do it 1 VM at a time. It's going to first power on any of these base capacity VMs, and then it will start creating and powering on these burst capacity VMs. Scale in, on the other hand, works slightly differently. That works based on a low threshold. If you go beyond, drop below this threshold for 15 minutes or longer in this particular configuration, then the system is going to start scaling in 1 VM at a time. And scaling in, again, means either deleting the capacity that's burst capacity or stopping once all the burst capacity VMs have been deleted, then stopping these VMs that are part of the base capacity. And you can also specify some scale-in restrictions. For example, you can specify when it is allowed to do scale-in. For example, you may want to tell the system that before the end of business hours, scale-in is not allowed, and that's actually a recommended practice. So this is the CPU usage autoscale trigger. The second autoscale trigger is called average active sessions, and this one allows you to specify how many sessions you want to tolerate per session host on average. So this is going to allow you to say how many session hosts on average are going to trigger a scale out operation. So let's say if we have, if we have a 2-core VM, if we get more than 3 sessions per host, then we want to start scaling out and building more capacity so that there's more available capacity available in the host pool. And then the same thing, we can specify at what point do we want to start scaling in which case we can specify an average, let's say, of 1. That means that if the average drops below 1, then the system is going to start scaling in those VMs that have no sessions on them whatsoever. So that's the average active session trigger. Then there is also one called available sessions. Available sessions allows you to actually specify how many maximum sessions per host you want to allow. So again, if we have a 2-core VM, a D2S v3, and we are expecting to be able to get 4 users per VM, the system tells us that we have a maximum capacity of 20 in our configuration. Why is that? Because we have 3 base host pool capacity, 2 burst capacity for a total of 5, times 4 VMs per host gives us a maximum of 20. And then we tell the system how many available sessions we want to maintain in the system. So for instance, if we tell it that we always want to have 4 available sessions, that means we always want a minimum of 1 available host. So imagine users come in the morning, there is 1 host that's on, nobody's logged into it, our number of available sessions is 4. As soon as the first user logs in, the number of available sessions drops to 3, right? Because the user has consumed 1 of the 4 available sessions. And this immediately triggers a scale out operation, which first is going to power on the base capacity VMs. And then once all of these are powered on, then it's going to tap into the burst capacity VMs. And then similar concept as with CPU usage, we can tell the system what the scale in restrictions are. So we can tell it to only scale in after the end of business hours. And in all of these scenarios, the pre-staging capacity is very useful. Instead of relying on the system to scale out as users are logging in real time, and if many users are coming in and logging in at the same time, the system may not be able to keep up in scaling out fast enough. That's why we've created a pre-stage capacity option where you can come in and specify how many hosts you want to have available by what time of day during the work week. This is going to start a few minutes before this time and actually get the capacity ready to go for the users when they walk into the office. So these are the 4 available autoscale algorithms. We looked at the single user desktops. We looked at CPU usage. We looked at average sessions, and we looked at available sessions as CPU, as scale triggers for the scaling logic in dynamic host pools. See you next time.